This is FSRN, the weekly edition. I'm Nell Abram. Coming up on today's show, Europe is under increasing pressure to address a refugee crisis that has become too big to ignore. Guatemala's president resigns to face corruption charges on the cusp of a national election. And a visual art project illustrates life inside a family detention center in Texas through letters written by women and children held there. Those stories and more on FSRN's Weekly Edition. The humanitarian crisis unfolding across Europe deepens as record numbers of refugees continue to arrive by land and sea, fleeing violence and poverty in the war-torn Middle East, North Africa, and humanitarian crises elsewhere. The depth of desperation is increasingly evident in images and videos revealing horrific scenes playing out from beaches in Turkey to train tracks in Hungary. European leaders are struggling to craft a unified response to the crisis that's threatening the 28-nation bloc's open borders policy. FSRN's Jacob Resnick reports from Brussels.
3-year-old Aylan Kurdi's lifeless body washed ashore on a beach in Turkey Wednesday. Images of the toddler's body in the surf circled the globe, underscoring the urgency of the mounting refugee crisis pouring out of the Middle East into Europe. The child drowned along with his 5-year-old brother and their mother while trying to cross the Mediterranean to reach relative safety in Greece. Thursday, video captured another scene of anguish in Hungary, where desperate refugees have been trying to make their way through the country to Germany. Hungarian officials stopped trains jam-packed with refugees shortly after they departed a railway station in Budapest. One couple pleaded with police and finally threw themselves on the tracks. The images painfully reveal the plight of refugees as they migrate through southern and eastern Europe on their way to more prosperous countries like France, Sweden, and Germany that offer the prospect of paid work and education opportunities. Hungary complains of being overwhelmed by the crisis and is constructing a controversial fence along its southern border with Serbia in a vain attempt to keep migrants from crossing on their way into the European Union. More than 140,000 migrants have entered from Serbia this year. Speaking in Brussels on Thursday, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban leveled the blame on Germany for its de facto open-door policy towards war refugees, which he blames for encouraging thousands to illegally transit his country and break European laws.
The problem is not a European problem. The problem is a German problem. Nobody would like to stay in Hungary. So we don't have difficulties with those who would like to stay in Hungary. Nobody would like to stay in Hungary, neither in Slovakia, nor Poland, nor Estonia. All of them would like to go to Germany.
But it's true that refugees don't want to stay in Eastern Europe, which makes Hungary's crackdown on transiting refugees all the more puzzling. Take, for example, Shaban, a Syrian refugee who had paid for a boat crossing from Turkey to Greece. Earlier this week, he skirted the border fence and walked into Hungary. He told a waiting camera crew from the German state broadcaster Deutsche Welle that he seeks a new life in Germany for himself and his family.
This is my chance in Syria. My house and my factory is destroyed. This is a war. Just is the war. I can't talk then more. It's enough.
Hungary's attempt to prevent people from crossing has been roundly criticized by other European leaders. French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius says each country in the 28-nation bloc has a commitment to accept war refugees seeking asylum.
With regard to all those people who are politically chased out of their country and who are in war-torn countries, we have to be able to welcome them. It's called the plea for asylum, and every country has to respond to that. France, Germany, and others have. But when I see certain European countries that do not accept these groups, I find that scandalous.
Despite Hungarian police pulling refugees off of trains, many hundreds have begun reaching Germany. In the southern city of Rosenheim, near the Austrian border, German officials say there is not enough space to feed and house the hundreds of people as they arrive. Federal police spokesman Rainer Scharf says German police have stopped checking trains and are, for the most part, allowing refugees to pass through the district on their way to larger cities in the country.
We are reaching our limits here at the police station, and I would go as far as saying that we are beyond our limit. We are trying to do what is possible within our capabilities.
Challenges remain in separating asylum cases from those who could be safely sent back to their countries of origin. And of course, there are divergent ideas on how many refugees each country within the EU should accept. Germany projects receiving 800,000 migrants this year, but warns such a figure is not sustainable in the long term. There are also fears of a racist backlash following clashes between police and far-right demonstrators opposed to refugee centers and a spate of attacks directed at refugee housing, mostly in poorer parts of eastern Germany. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said there would be no accommodating far-right activists opposed to refugees.
Was mich anficht ist, dass wir solchen Hass und solche
What bothers me is that we are seeing this hatred, this atmosphere in our country, and my response to it is emphatic. A clear line must be drawn. There can be no excuses. Of course, we will put forward our arguments, but we cannot show a trace of sympathy.
Nicht, würde ich sagen, die Spur von Verständnis zeigen.
And then there is the human toll. The International Organization for Migration said Tuesday that more than 350,000 migrants have risked their lives crossing the Mediterranean this year. Of those, at least 2,600 have died trying to make it to Europe. Most of those deaths are due to drownings, but those crossing by land also take risks. That was illustrated last week with the gruesome discovery in Austria of 71 dead bodies, believed to be Syrian refugees, found in the back of an abandoned poultry truck parked by the side of the road. Police have arrested at least 5 suspected traffickers in that case. And so as divisions between European countries about how to respond to the mounting crisis remain, European interior ministers are set to meet later this month in an emergency meeting. But so far, there remains little accord on appropriate and humane measures to address what many describe as Europe's largest refugee crisis since World War II. Jacob Resnick, FSRN, Brussels.
Guatemalan voters head to the polls Sunday in the midst of a major political crisis that has toppled even those at the highest echelons of political power. FSRN's Shannon Young has more.
A massive corruption investigation in Guatemala gathered so much momentum this week that Otto Pérez Molina went from president to prisoner in the span of 24 hours Thursday. The country's Congress voted unanimously to strip Pérez Molina of his presidential immunity on Tuesday, making it possible for him to become the highest-ranking official prosecuted in the scandal. Other top political figures allegedly formed part of a network called La Línea, which is accused of stealing resources and revenue from agencies and state-run institutions like the Customs Office and public healthcare system. Ex-President Otto Pérez Molina is facing charges of criminal association, bribery, and fraud. As part of evidentiary hearings that began Thursday and continued Friday, prosecutors played recordings of wiretapped phone conversations of other alleged La Línea members that they say directly implicate the president in the corruption network. The fast-moving scandal erupted in April, and protesters have been in the streets ever since demanding accountability. While demonstrators celebrate the move to strip the president of immunity and charge him in the case, Guatemalan human rights activist Claudia Samayoa says it's only the beginning.
We will still have to see how the courts of appeals and the tribunals react to these very complex cases. That is why what you see is the pressure of the people that have understood that it's not only a question of denouncing a person like Otto Pérez Molina. It's a question of following up this case all the way to the sentencing and to the confirmation of the sentencing, because impunity lawyers and impunity groups are just hidden all over the structure, and they can destroy years of work. So people are clear that we will have to maintain the pressure if we want the mafia to really get out of the political system.
Replacing Pérez Molina as president of Guatemala is Alejandro Maldonado, who many Guatemalans point to as part of the structure of impunity within the political system. As a magistrate of the Constitutional Court, Maldonado helped to overturn the landmark genocide conviction of former President Efraín Ríos Montt. Many participants in the protest movement also oppose holding elections before deep reforms are implemented that would prevent allegedly corrupt individuals from running for public office. Some in Guatemala, notably within the country's large indigenous population, are calling for an overhaul of the nation's constitution. Shannon Young, FSRN, Oaxaca.
In Malaysia this week, more than 1,000 anti-corruption advocates gathered for a summit convened by Transparency International. Malaysia's Prime Minister was scheduled to deliver the keynote address, but he didn't show up. Najib Razak has come under substantial fire following recent reports that $700 million of state money made its way into his personal bank account. The allegations of financial misappropriation were front and center at a huge pro-democracy rally last weekend in the country that hasn't had a change of government since independence in 1957. The two-day rally in Kuala Lumpur ended on the eve of the country's Independence Day, which marked the 58th year of the current government's uninterrupted rule. Johnny Blackerley was at the rally and reports that the demand for free and fair elections in the country is growing.
The soundtrack to the growing Malaysian pro-democracy movement is a song by a group of young Malay musicians whose band is called Bangsat. Named after the inner Kuala Lumpur suburb where they grew up, Bangsa, the band's members are all friends and activists who've been playing together for around 4 years. Amir Abdul Hadi is the lead singer.
Music by itself is an aspect of everything. It's in the movies, in the radio, in the media. But music by itself, it won't change things. But music will bring these people together and help in the change.
The band performed as a part of a weekend mass protest where, according to independent media sources, about 100,000 people took to the streets in one of the biggest rallies for democratic change Malaysia has seen in recent years. The protest was organised by a non-governmental organisation called Bersih, which means clean. It's the fourth rally they've held since 2007, calling for free and fair elections. The rally spanned 2 days. The night before it began, authorities banned the rally's shirt, a yellow t-shirt printed with the word Bersih. Many wore it anyway and came prepared with masks and salt in the case of tear gas. Bangsat singer Amir says that playing music at the protest also has its risks. At the last rally, police confiscated their drums.
Fighting for this cause is a risk we are willing to take. We have been arrested many times. It's pretty much become a norm. Everyone has been arrested at least once. I've been arrested twice. And Adam Adley is the most, about 10 times.
Bersih, bersih, bersih. Turun, turun, turun. Bersih, bersih, bersih.
The most recent Bersih protest was called for about a month ago in the wake of damning corruption allegations involving the Prime Minister, Najib Abdul Razak. In July, the Wall Street Journal published reports that $700 million linked to a failing Malaysian state investment fund was deposited into Najib's private bank account. Najib initially denied the allegations, but later admitted that the money had in fact gone into his account. He insisted the funds were not embezzled, but rather were a political donation from an unnamed Middle Eastern source. Despite some criticisms even within his own party, Najib has maintained his grip on power.
It is not wrong to receive donation. And to me, it is more transparent to put in a bank than to accept cash.
Tourism and Culture Minister Nazri Aziz denies Prime Minister Najib did any wrong in accepting the money.
As long as Najib is not receiving the money from mafia or from the any underground agent, activities agent, that's okay.
And according to Nazri, ordinary Malaysians shouldn't be concerned. But the tens of thousands in the streets disagree. Many are angry at the alleged corruption and also the rising cost of living and the falling Malaysian ringgit. James came down to the protest with his 2 sons and 3 nephews, all wearing the banned yellow shirt. He says that he's proud to bring the next generation with him to this protest.
The other ones before was just for clean elections. This is not only for the elections, as you can see, clean government, right to protest. So because we feel shackled to a certain degree. I mean, today, wearing this shirt is against the law. See, according to the Printing and Publications Act, this is against the law. So, if we don't do something now, I mean, you can't dictate what we wear and what not. So we have to show them we have a voice.
Throughout the afternoon, the crowds swelled as more and more people joined in the demonstrations. Through the jam-packed narrow streets where thousands elbow each other for space to breathe, the drums and songs of Bangsat fire up the crowd. As night fell, a festival atmosphere emerged. Thousands of the protesters spent the night sleeping on the streets. Police banned tents at the event, so protesters made do with thin sleeping mats or less. In a show of patriotism, rather than a reprise of Bangsat's pro-democracy anthem, the rally closed with a different song, the national anthem, Negaraku. While it's yet to be seen what, if anything, will come from the protests, the voices of the democracy movement in Malaysia were heard, loud and clear. Johnny Blackali, FSRN, Kuala Lumpur.
You're listening to FSRN, Free Speech Radio News. FSRN is independent, non-commercial media. To find out how you can support FSRN, visit our website, fsrn.org. A report released Thursday by the U.S. Department of Justice detailed what it called provocative tactics used by police in Ferguson, Missouri, against protesters in the 17 days immediately following the fatal police shooting of 18-year-old Michael Brown. The assessment identified 6 pervasive themes throughout the police response, including inconsistent leadership, failure to understand endemic problems in the community, and the use of ineffective and inappropriate strategies and tactics. In an introductory letter to the 188-page report, the DOJ's Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services Director Ronald Davis wrote, "The demonstrations that followed the shooting death of Michael Brown were more than a moment of discord in one small community. They've become part of a national movement to reform our criminal justice system and represent a new civil rights movement." After more than a year of sustained protest on the issue of police brutality, members of that new civil rights movement, also known as the Black Lives Matter movement, have released concrete policy proposals ahead of the next elections. Janie Ackman reports from Washington, D.C.
Members of the civil rights movement known as Black Lives Matter have taken their demands for police accountability from the streets to the campaign trail, showing up at political events to pressure candidates to take a public stance on the issue. In mid-August, video captured by Good magazine showed presidential hopeful Hillary Clinton responding defensively to a visit from Black Lives Matter activists. The two sides met privately after the activists were turned away from Clinton's forum on substance abuse after the room had reached capacity.
Because you can get lip service from as many white people as you can hack into Yankee Stadium and a million more like it, who are going to say, oh, we get it, we're going to be nicer, okay? That's not enough, at least in my book. That's not how I see politics.
Clinton challenged the activists to turn their rhetoric into specific policy proposals. A group within the Black Lives Matter activists called We the Protesters has since released a detailed policy proposal called Campaign Zero. Sam Singyangwe is one of the campaign's organizers.
The reason that it's launched really is to make very clear the kinds of solutions that we need to see in our communities and police violence, both at the local, state, and federal level, so that elected officials can begin taking action on those ideas.
Solutions offered by Campaign Zero include more community oversight mechanisms, limited use of force by law enforcement, equipping police officers with body cameras, demilitarization of police departments, and the use of independent prosecutors for cases in which police seriously injure or kill someone. There are 10 solutions in total. The proposals have caught the attention of Congressman Hank Johnson, a Democrat from Georgia.
I do believe that with the policy proposals set out by Campaign Zero, it's clear that these young people are not just a flash in the pan, so to speak. They are for real.
Johnson, a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, has already introduced some bills in line with the group's goals. One, called the Grand Jury Reform Act, would appoint a special prosecutor to conduct a public probable cause hearing when considering criminal charges against a police officer. Another, the Police Accountability Act, would make it a federal crime for police officers to commit murder and manslaughter. These bills have been referred to committee for consideration, but Johnson believes that many of the group's concerns can only be dealt with by local policy reform.
There are some things that the federal government can do to incentivize them, and we'll be looking at those kinds of steps that we can take on a federal level.
Another initiative to emerge out of the Black Lives Matter movement is Justice Together, which officially launched last week. According to its website, Justice Together aims to create policy coalitions in each state and tell what the group describes as richer and more nuanced stories about the people affected by police brutality. For that, the website directs viewers to a platform called Building the Red Record, a nod to a book written by Ida B. Wells in 1895 detailing the crisis of lynching in America. Time will tell if the proposals put forth by these organizations will find traction, but the launch of these campaigns shows how a movement that started in the streets is continuing to diversify its tactics to achieve concrete policy goals. According to Campaign Zero's Sing Yangwei, only presidential candidates Bernie Sanders, an independent senator from Vermont, and Democrat Martin O'Malley, former governor of Maryland, have issued comprehensive criminal justice proposals. Yet he says he's hopeful that the release of the activist agenda will lead others to step up. Janie Ackman, FSRN, Washington, D.C.
While world attention is now on European countries and how they choose to handle the refugee crisis within their borders, a refugee situation in the United States remains largely ignored. Women and children continue to flee violence in Central America, only to end up detained in jail-like settings while awaiting the outcome of their asylum petitions. Immigration authorities argue the family detention policy serves as a deterrent. But U.S. District Court Judge Dolly G. of California recently ruled the policy violates a long-standing, legally binding agreement, the 1997 Flores Settlement, and gave immigration authorities until October 23rd to release detained minors. Legal experts say it's likely hundreds will be in limbo as the case wends its way through the courts. Life inside one of the facilities opened expressly to detain immigrant mothers with their children is the focus of a nationwide art collaboration called Visions from the Inside. The collaborative was organized through Culture Strike and was inspired by letters penned by detained women and children inside a family detention facility in Karnes County, Texas. Sadia Malik has more.
At his quiet East Oakland, California cottage, 35-year-old Robert Trujillo works as an artist and illustrator. He's one of 15 artists selected by the San Francisco Bay Area-based Culture Strike for Visions from the Inside, a collaboration in which illustrators visually interpret first-hand accounts related in letters written by women and children held at a family detention center in South Texas. Trujillo adapted one such letter written by a 10-year-old named Miguel. The piece portrays details from the boy's description of daily life in the detention center and includes a large man with an angry face on the front of his head and a happy face on the back. The figure is hunched over and pointing at two children.
The boy, when he wrote the letter, he talked about how the guards that they work with can be kind of two-faced, and how some of them will be, very kind, when the media is around, or when they feel like it, they'll be a little bit kind, but when it comes to other things, like they'll just turn very quickly and be very mean to them.
Trujillo was invited to participate in the Visions from the Inside collaboration by Culture Strike's Artist Projects Manager, Julio Salgado, a 31-year-old undocumented artist who also contributed a piece to the series. Salgado's illustration shows a mother and son huddled inside an ice cube. He explains that the mother who wrote the letter that inspired the piece said she'd been kept for 7 days in a frigid detention cell, a practice that immigrant detainees say is not uncommon.
And it's called hieleras or icebox because it gets really cold. And a lot of the times they do this on purpose. Immigration does this on purpose so that people get desperate and then sign detention. The self-deportation releases, and you sign the papers and that's it without seeing a judge or anything. And And so the letter mentioned, and I'm not gonna forget this, like it mentions like the mom mentioning how she celebrated her kid's first birthday inside of a detention center. And so I put that, I made this like mom and this kid's like hugging each other, and there's like a birthday cake with the number 1.
Salgado says the concept behind Visions from the Inside stemmed from a conversation he had with a detainee during a visit to the Eloy Detention Center in Arizona earlier this year, organized by Mariposas Sin Fronteras, an advocacy group for undocumented LGBTQ in detention.
And so I noticed, he had writing, he had a piece of paper, and so I asked him about the letter writing. So I'm like, how important is for you letter writing? And he was just like, it's the only way that I can tell my own story, and it's the only way that I can get in touch with organizations like Mariposas Sin Fronteras. And because people don't write letters anymore. We live in the world of email and texting, and so you don't realize how something so basic to a lot of us, to like write a letter, how crucial it is for people in detention centers to communicate with the outside world.
The letters that inspired Visions from the Inside are part of a digital archive provided by the End Family Detention Network. Detention capacity for holding mothers with children has expanded exponentially since the summer of 2014, during a spike in apprehensions of unaccompanied minors and of women with children along the border with Mexico. Most of those now in family detention are from Central America and are awaiting the outcomes of asylum claims. The detention center in Karnes County, Texas, is one of 2 large for-profit facilities in South Texas, open since 2014 specifically to detain immigrant women with children. But Stephen Kang, Equal Justice Rights Fellow with the American Civil Liberties Union Immigrants' Rights Project, says there are viable alternatives to detention.
The government basically made the argument that we need to be able to use these fast-track deportation procedures to deport women and children. And we really question whether that's actually true. It can instead just refer these women and children, most of whom have quite valid and strong asylum claims, and just refer them to regular removal proceedings before an immigration judge where they're going to get a full and fair chance to present their claims. And that would also not require them to be detained at these facilities where these women and children are clearly suffering.
A federal judge in California recently ruled that the detention of immigrant children in jail-like facilities is unlawful and in violation of a long-standing agreement known as the Flores Settlement, and has given the Obama administration until October 23rd to release the minors. What will come after detention, or whether the mothers will be released with their children, remains to be seen. Through their work, artists behind Visions from the Inside hope to provide a glimpse of how women and children experience living in a prison-like setting in a way that people on the outside can understand. Asadia Malik, FSRN, Oakland.
And that does it for this week's program. Music in today's show is by Maddie Palanen via Jamendo.com. Technical support was provided by Louis Reining at WTJU in Charlottesville, Virginia. Shannon Young provides editorial services from Oaxaca, Mexico. FSRN is supported by the radio stations that carry our show and by listeners like you. For more information about how you can support FSRN, visit our website, fsrn.org. From Tampa, Florida, I'm Nell Abram. Thanks for listening.